Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where obviously there's a lot to discuss when it comes to the DC movies, but that's going to get its own video later today. I've slept on it, and I think I know what they need to do next. But again, as I said, that will be the subject of its own video later today on the main Beyond the Trailer channel. But we've got three stories to discuss today, and the first is a potential similar Suicide Squad type situation, which is fast approaching, and that's Disney's Rogue One, their first Star Wars standalone story. There is a lot riding on that movie because not only is it the first standalone film, and they're trying to launch that idea that Star Wars films can exist outside of the main storyline, which Kathleen Kennedy has defined as following the Skywalkers, but also it's following The Force Awakens, which of course was a huge hit. People are divided on how good the film is creatively, I think especially after some time has passed and the initial excitement died down. However, there's no arguing that the film is a huge financial success. It's the third highest grossing film of all time. And so, of course, Disney wants to prove that that is the norm and not just, something that happened because it was the first film back, right? So, again, Rogue One is a really important movie. It's pivotal, I would say, for the Star Wars brand. But what's developed, is this story that the reshoots, not only have they reshot an extensive amount of the film, and that including the ending, they've totally changed the ending. But the newest development is that in the edit bay, Gareth Edwards, the director of the film, is not in charge, and that Tony Gilroy, who has been brought in to rescript a lot of the film, is also in charge of the reshoots. Now, he and Gareth Edwards have actually worked before. Tony tried to fix Godzilla, and as pretty much anyone will tell you, he couldn't fix it. Again, maybe it was better than what Gareth Edwards came up with, but Godzilla has a lot of story problems. But they've decided to bring Tony in again. And Tony Gilroy is a name you might be familiar with. His brother Dan is behind the Nightcrawler film. But Tony Gilroy is very well known because he rose to fame on the Bourne movies. He both rose and fell on the Bourne films. He wrote the Bourne movies. He was extremely well paid as a screenwriter, one of the highest paying screenwriting gigs in Hollywood in recent memory. And to the point where he took over the franchise. There was a very public fight between him and Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass, and he decided, Universal sided with Gilroy for the Bourne legacy, which did not work out. And so now, of course, that franchise is back in the hands of Damon and Greengrass. But Tony Gilroy was able to do Michael Clayton. He has a relationship with George Clooney as well. And for a while there, he was riding really high. But after the Bourne legacy, that was a bit of a setback. However, it seems he has another opportunity here with being integral to the fixing of Rogue One. But I think this is a really interesting situation that's developing in Hollywood. Hopefully, reshoots, as many of you have pointed out, aren't always a bad thing. Sometimes they do fix a movie. World War Z is a great example of a movie where the whole last third of it was reshot at great expense and a great effort and very publicly, and it turned out great. I really liked World War Z, and even if you didn't like World War Z, again, it's a situation where it did very well financially. But so Rogue One could work out, or it could be another situation where you have a Suicide Squad debacle. But anyway, what we're seeing emerge here on the broader scale, again, we're going to talk DC specifically later today, but in Hollywood in general, what the picture that's coming into focus is that there's such a demand for tentpole pictures from the audience because it's pretty much the only thing people are willing to pay to see in theaters these days, that Hollywood, to meet up with that at somewhat of a fiscally responsible way, although whatever they're saving on directors, they are blowing on budgets, bloated budgets, and having to do reshoots. So maybe if, the thinking is that let's get cheaper directors in here, maybe if they paid a little bit more for the director up front, they wouldn't have to have all the reshoots, and then therefore it would be worth the higher salary, right away. But anyway, not only are directors who can do tentpole pictures expensive, but they're also far and few between. Hopefully, a new army of them will be trained, right? But for now, they have to take a risk sometimes on new talent because experienced talent simply isn't available, even if they are willing to pay for them. But it's a perfect storm of lack of talent, trying to save money, and also time. One of the things they're talking about with Suicide Squad is a really rushed timetable of announcing the movie, making sure it gets out there. But I think at some point, the studios are going to have to balance what's more damning to make sure the movie meets its initially announced release date, or the movie is good when it is released, right? I mean, I think that, release date means nothing to the audience if the film that's delivered is as poor as Suicide Squad is. So I think it's very interesting. I think that, Disney, which has been very vocal about Rogue One, would not comment on this latest development that Tony Gilroy was in charge of the re-editing after the reshoots, and that Gareth Edwards was in an advisory position, advising his own movie. That has got to hurt and be just so difficult for Gareth Edwards. But of course, I'm sure Gareth Edwards doesn't want to have his name on a clunker, and the coverage has said that Gareth Edwards will remain the face of the movie, which was why he was at Star Wars Celebration in Europe just a few weeks ago. But it's fascinating to consider that while he was sitting there as the face of the film, Tony Gilroy was actually making the movie. So it's a crazy situation. So we will see. But as we know from Bourne Legacy, Tony Gilroy, and also from Godzilla, Tony Gilroy's involvement doesn't necessarily mean a fix. So that's the first story of the day. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that. The second story, talking about credit and who did what, there's a story that came out of Comic-Con, which is gained some momentum. It's a slow news cycle, outside of what's going on with Suicide Squad in DC right now. So maybe that's one of the reasons that this story is gaining traction. But it actually was in the Hollywood Reporter today, and I thought that was very interesting. It's Bill Sienkiewicz, extremely well-known comic book artist, very iconic. And what happened to him, his experience at Comic-Con when it comes to X-Men Apocalypse and Fox. So the story goes, according to Bill, that he is the one who was responsible for that art on the Dazzler album that was that scene that was cut from the mall in X-Men Apocalypse. We saw the photo. It was used actually to promote the movie in advance. Another trend that's emerging. Don't show people things that aren't going to be in the movie because they get excited about it. That's one of the big problems that I had with Suicide Squad, and I suspect many people will. And people weren't happy not to see those mall scenes in the movie in X-Men Apocalypse either. But anyway, there was that cool Dazzler album record, and the record cover was this great comic book art, which was actually something that Bill Sienkiewicz did like back in the 80s, right? Which is perfect, of course, for a movie that takes place in the 80s. But anyway, Bill Sienkiewicz was walking around Comic-Con, and actually he first found out about this because people came up to him and said, will you please autograph this reproduction, this limited edition reproduction of the Dazzler album, because you drew it. And Bill Sienkiewicz was like, what the what? Because he was like, I can't believe that this would happen at Comic-Con and I would not be alerted by Fox. He said, the classy thing to do would be to give me a little bit of money because you're reproducing my art with benefit to yourself financially. These were given away, of course. They were giveaways, but of course it's to promote X-Men Apocalypse and to sell Blu-rays. And that's why X-Men Apocalypse had a presence at Comic-Con to really push that Blu-ray release, which is coming up. So Bill Sienkiewicz said, it would have been nice to give me a little bit of money, but what I really would have liked was a heads up, maybe a thank you, right? At least a thank you, like thanks for that great artwork. We're enjoying using it for the movie. And then also a credit would have been cool, right? Even in the press release for the free giveaway, or maybe on the back of the album cover, just something that says, hey, do you like this artwork? It's Bill Sienkiewicz. And I have to say, I think it's hard for him to argue that he should get any money out of it because, the rights for that, it's filtered through so many companies at this point. It's not Marvel, it's going through Fox. Although it's interesting that, Fox is able to use Marvel artwork in their film, even though it's not a Marvel movie, right? So I think if you're getting the approval from Marvel to use that artwork, I don't know why Marvel wasn't like, hey, well, can you look out for our artist? Although that's a whole different conversation about the relationship that talent has with Marvel, the comics publisher, which according to some people, I have to say, in the comic book world, the relationship between talent and the publisher at all the big companies is tricky. So, of course, Alan Moore infamously has fought with DC. It's a difficult situation. But Bill Sienkiewicz, I think, it would have been nice to at least, I think that at the very least, even if you didn't tell Bill what was happening, and it would have been nice to have him at the booth to sign the giveaway. I think that would have been a cool thing to do because, of course, it's Comic-Con. But, I think crediting him is important. I think to credit the material is really, really crucial. Even if you didn't credit Bill Sienkiewicz, I think it would have been nice to say this cover was from this issue of this comic from this date. I just think it's the nice thing to do. But anyway, as these worlds continue to blend, I think it's interesting to see that comics continue to get walked all over by the movie division, and there's just so little respect there. All right, so anyway, that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day ties into the viewer question. So we're going to talk sequels for the rest of the episode, right? So 2 big sequels were just recently announced. So this is the third story, then before we go into the viewer question. So, Secret Life of Pets 2 was just confirmed by Universal, and Illumination Entertainment is set for July 13th, 2018. Now that movie's already playing in theaters and it's very successful. It's no Despicable Me, movie, but it's very strong. So what's interesting about that date though is that's very competitive. Now it's going to go. Toy Story 4 is set for June 15th, but of course Secret Life of Pets, the first film, was able to compete in the same space as Finding Dory. There was enough breathing room there. Although let's be honest, Toy Story 4 is a much bigger juggernaut than Finding Dory, right? I mean, although Finding Nemo is a very successful Pixar movie, still Toy Story is in a league of its own. But Secret Life of Pets feels there's enough breathing room there between Secret Life of Pets 2 and Toy Story 4 from June 5th. It's basically a month, June 15th, July 13th. But who's really in trouble here is Fox. They have 2 dates held for unanimated movie, either from Blue Sky or DreamWorks Animation, which are now both at that. DreamWorks Animation, I guess that information hasn't been changed because DreamWorks is now at Universal. So this would be Blue Sky. I guess Fox hasn't released these dates, and that's why Universal feels they can take them. But it's, let's see here. Fox had a dibs on July 20th and then also June 29th. And I think both of those dates aren't going to work now with Secret Life of Pets smack in the middle of them. But it's interesting to see the chessboard that has become the distribution release schedule. So anyway, that sequel's pretty set because that movie's already playing and it's doing very well. Now, Fantastic Beasts 2, the jury is still out on whether or not Warner Brothers is going to be able to launch a new Harry Potter, trilogy. The first one wasn't a trilogy, obviously. It was 8 freaking movies. But Fantastic Beasts, is trying to breathe new life into the wizarding world. It's a big test to see if that brand can exist outside of Harry Potter. But anyway, they first were talking up the script for Fantastic Beasts 2, being like, it's all written, we're ready to go. And now they're staking out a release date. This is November 16th, 2018. And that's interesting because the Star Wars, usually, holiday season is very, Disney has a pretty good grip on it. They release an animated movie for the holidays, and they're doing that with Gigantic, for Thanksgiving. And then December, they do a Star Wars movie, but not in 2018, actually. That's a Star Wars standalone year. It's not one of the episodes. And that's supposed to be the Han Solo movie, and that actually has a May release date. I would caution them off of moving out of December because, they want to make that Star Wars month. But Han Solo, of course, kind of feels like a summer property, to be fair. And it is Phil Lord and Chris Miller, and it's going to be has really strong comedic aspects to it. So we'll see. But anyway, Fantastic Beasts is a different situation because that movie the first one hasn't been released. So there's no idea as to how strong it will be. I mean, remember Fantastic Four in 2015? They had not only announced a sequel, but they also kind of had a release date set, basically. So take with a giant grain of salt any sequels that are announced before you see how a film does at the box office. Like Jurassic World 2 is definitely coming out, but Fantastic Beasts 2, let's see how the first one does. I think this situation is to try and instill a positive spin on the film because its ad campaign has really kind of failed to do so. So Warner Brothers is trying to demonstrate a considerable amount of faith in the first movie. Like, we believe in this so much. We have a script. We have a sequel release date. We are in the Fantastic Beasts business. But the ones who will really decide that are the audience and the box office returns. So anyway, this leads to the viewer question from Grace Morera, a frequent BTT viewer who I've talked to in a Skype call. So Grace says, question. Grace asks Grace, question, could you give an update about sequel prospects for Warcraft, Tarzan, and Ghostbusters? Thanks. Yes, those are all very, very films that are very iffy, very controversial movies as well. And so this is all speculation because these are not movies that the studio has shown a tremendous amount of faith in just yet. Warcraft is at least approaching being able to break even. And I think that it did very well in China. And we'll see how it does. It might find new life in streaming. Batman v Superman, for instance, has done very well in streaming. I think Tarzan is going to do very well in streaming. Sometimes if that's the important thing. If the box office, if the domestic box office or the foreign box office can't save a movie, sometimes it does really well on demand where an audience discovers it finally and they're like, oh, this was good. And I think that Warcraft and Tarzan are 2 movies that have really strong potential to get a second life through streaming. Now, so Warcraft was so expensive. I don't know if they'll make a sequel to it. I think drastic changes would need to be made. I think Tarzan of all these movies has the best prospects of a sequel because audiences really rallied behind that film. I also think a lot of people are going to discover it on streaming. And I think that it can be easily fixed going forward. I think you really just have to change the director. I think it's already very well cast. And I think that you can easily bring down the budget if they just work a little bit harder in pre-production, all right? Because, of course, Tarzan had major reshoots. Now, you'll notice that I have not yet discussed Ghostbusters. I think that Ghostbusters is in a class on its own because of the social conversation that just swarmed around it and really, in a large degree, ended up overshadowing it. So while I think that Warcraft and Tarzan, it's really a numbers matter and whether or not the faithful audience is there and if they can maybe expand the faithful audience through streaming, I think that I don't know if Sony wants to go through the Ghostbusters situation again, especially since the box office response has been tepid, right? Like, it's been not horrible, but it's certainly, nobody really rallied to the defense of that movie. And especially as they should have, considering how much it was talked about. Tarzan, that was like, Tarzan and Warcraft, it's like, it's a Hail Mary, God bless the people who supported it. But Ghostbusters, such a gauntlet was thrown down, a referendum was thrown down by the haters, that the fact that there wasn't a strong response from the supporters is very telling, right? So Paul Feig himself said it's got to get to be 500 million worldwide. There's no way it's going to get to be 500 million worldwide, especially with no China release. So I think that Ghostbusters probably will continue at Sony because of the brand, but it's going to continue probably in such a different fashion that I don't know if you could really call it a sequel. I think they're going to have to be major changes done. I would say, I'm not even quite sure what to do about Ghostbusters because it's such a mess. And I think that the conversation has gotten away from the movie itself. I thought it was a fun movie, albeit a B movie, which needed a lot of work and needs a lot of work going forward. And I think that I would probably put some guys on the team, but then I don't know how people would respond to that. Again, the conversation is so far from the movie itself that it's really problematic. And I think you want to put a lot of distance between whatever the new Ghostbusters movie is and I was going to a press screening the other day for Suicide Squad, and it was on 42nd Street, and I was walking by Madame Tussauds, and they had a Leslie Jones wax figure from Ghostbusters out front. And usually when there's a wax figure out front, a lot of people want to take photos with it. It gets a lot of attention. And I have to say, while there was a little bit of a crowd looking at the Leslie Jones figure with some interest, nobody wanted to pose for a photo with it. Nobody was really paying attention to it. And as much as I like Leslie Jones and I feel horrible for the way she's been treated with this movie, I think that when you just put your business hat on, you go, you know what? There just isn't an audience for that. There's no demand for that. It's really unfortunate, but nobody wants it. And that's, it's like when you have a product that you really believe in, but you look at the sales numbers, I think a good business person has to go, well, that didn't work out. Darn it, And I think that's kind of what happened with Ghostbusters. An all-female Ghostbusters that really is self-aware of being an all-female Ghostbusters movie, it was not well received. So Ghostbusters will continue at some point, but I think that when it does continue, I don't really know if I would call it a sequel to the Ghostbusters that was just released in theaters. So in short, Warcraft, maybe. Tarzan, I think very strong odds for a sequel. Ghostbusters, also our Alexander Skarsgård's agent and manager, I'd be pushing that hard. I mean, what else is he doing really? And I think that there was a nice strong reaction to that. I was in an event and someone had someone was going through their phone and I noticed it because it was like a dark room and you're like, why is your phone on? And they had Alexander Skarsgård as their wallpaper. I was like, good for you, Skarsgård. So anyway, not as Tarzan, but just in general. But and then Ghostbusters, I think, has the least chance of a sequel, just because of how the conversation about the movie got away from Sony. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below today's top 3 stories and that viewer question, anything you'd like us to cover tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.